Everybody, welcome back to Cutthroat Commander. I'm your host Tim, and this week we are featuring Thada Adel, Acquisitor. And this match we're playing against a person named Freak Show. The name sounds familiar. I feel like I've played him before, but certainly not enough to know what deck he has. And we have this hand, which is okay. Then we look across the table and see that he's playing Edric, Spymaster of Trest. For those of you who don't know that card, Edric, Spymaster of Trest is 1 green blue. And whenever a creature deals combat damage to one of your opponents, its controller may draw a card. So, for those of you who do not know and did not watch my initial video about the format, Edric in 1v1 Commander is actually banned as a commander in real life in Paper Magic, in French Duel Commander. And the reason for that is that he's a cheap commander that will just draw you boatloads of cards and can be very hard to interact with. So the way these decks are typically built are rather scary for me. Usually they play every 1-drop green or blue creature with evasion, and then a few more after that with some various forms of utility. So they'll have turns like turn 1 Scrib Sprites, which is a 1/1 flyer for 1 green. Turn 2 Triton whatever, 1/1 blue unblockable, and then maybe a Flying Man, 1/1 flyer for blue. And then, they just simply drop Edric on turn 3 if you're not prepared, and draw a bunch of cards, which in turn allows it to draw even more cards the next turn, because this deck, in addition to playing a bunch of 1-drops, also plays a ton of counter magic usually, as well as tricks like bounce spells and bounce spells and some of the removal spells that blue and green do have, which are pretty few and far between. So basically cheap evasive creatures, counter spells, and Edric is how they win the game. Alright, so these decks are extremely hard to beat. You don't get banned in Duel Commander without being hard to beat. So I admit I come into this match expecting to lose, to be honest. Yes, I can probably island walk on him with Edric, with Thada Adel, but A, there's a chance he doesn't have any back-breaking artifacts to grab, and B, unfortunately you're put under the gun so fast and so hard that you just might not have the time to sit there and attack with a 2/2 for 3. Anyway, the key weakness of this deck is if they can't play Edric, their deck is a pile of 1/1s. The tuck rule is gone, so you do lose that avenue to permanently shut out Edric. So instead, you just have to really be careful about when you tap out. This hand does have a turn 2 counterspell on the draw, which is having a way to stop Edric when Freak Show is on the play is very key. So even though the rest of this hand is mediocre, I decided to go ahead and keep it. So here, he starts off with Temple of Mystery, and I start off with Relic of Progenitus. It's not worth it to bluff one like a Spell Pierce or a Force Spike, because their creatures are all expendable. Each 1/1's as good as the next, so they're not gonna bluff, or they're not gonna respect that bluff at all. And what this does allow me to do, since the graveyard's not really important for him, as you see, he plays the 2 1-drops I talked about earlier. This allows me to sit back and counter an Edric if that's what he chooses to play, which he does not, and that's pretty key. Or if he doesn't play anything, I can just crack the Relic. Now there's a chance that I could have waited till I could have kept up Counterspell and cracked the Relic, but I'm not concerned about Ambush Viper or Scrib Sprites here. And I draw Mana Crypt, which is fantastic. Alright, so what you'll notice here is he's clearly respecting the counterspell and not playing Edric. Which means he's not snowballing. He's not going to run Edric out, which means all he's doing is attacking with 1/1s, which, sure, that'll eventually get there, but it buys me an insane amount of time. And if I'm playing cards like Mana Crypt, that can allow me to possibly get past his counterspells or play a threat and keep up counterspell mana for Edric. Alright, so here I go ahead and play out the Mana Crypt, and the reason for this is it'll allow me to Venser and counterspell in the same turn. So here, once again, he doesn't play Edric, perhaps suspecting that I can beat him in that counter battle. And instead, he swings with these 3 and hits me. One important thing about the Mana Crypt is it does put me at an additional 1.5 damage a turn on average, so his clock is starting to tick up. So I can't afford to wait forever. But it's important to be patient. Right now, I don't really gain a lot by throwing the Venser out there. I win the flip, get a little lucky, and draw an island. And hitting my land drops is where I want to be, because right now I have enough business spells that I can keep going. And I just really want to hit my mana. Alright. So one good thing is they usually don't play, because they're playing Edric, they don't play a lot of card draw, things like Jace's Ingenuity or Thirst for Knowledge or anything like that. So usually if they hold up mana and you don't cast anything, they're just sitting there letting counterspells rot in their hand. Alright, so he plays Jace's Phantasm. Alright, so here I'm presented with an opportunity. As I mentioned in a previous video, or I think I did, a huge chunk of the blue counterspells played in Commander are double blue. There are a couple that are just colorless, like Remand, Disdainful Stroke, and Negate, and some others that we'll discuss, but for the most part, opponents are much more likely to have things like Dissolve, Dissipate, Mana Drain, Counterspell, things of that nature. Or the more expensive ones like Dismiss or Cryptic Command. So, if I can keep them off double blue on my turn, there is a good chance that I can resolve one of these threats. So I choose, in hindsight I might not have done this, but I choose to bounce one of his islands to try and force through a threat. One unfortunate thing is this doesn't really block, this only blocks one of his creatures. Here I win the flip again, get a little lucky, and draw a Time Warp. Time Warp's not that great just yet. What I really want to be able to do is cast one of these Planeswalkers into Time Warp. The reason for that is I'll actually get some use out of it instead of just cycling it, and I'm going to need all the value I can get if I'm going to pull this game out. He's got 4 cards in hand and hasn't really been playing 1-drops, so I know he has counters in hand. The question is what counters? Does he have something like Mana Leak? Does he have something like Negate? Does he have something like Dissolve or Counterspell that's stranded in his hand? And I've got to make some guesses at this point. And what I decide to do is I decide to lead with Bribery. Or, sorry, Tameo. The reason I lead with Tameo is one of 2 things. It can draw a bunch of cards if he lets it resolve. But also, aside from that brief spurt of card draw, it's not going to be terribly effective. Yes, I can lock down one of his creatures, but he can easily take care of that and peck it to death. And obviously he's going wide rather than going big, so the lockdown effect is much more limited. Here, he throws out negate. So my gambit with the Venser did not work. What's important to note is you do not fight over that. I cannot tap out because what happens the instant I tap out is he drops an Edric and draws 3 cards. And that probably puts the game out of reach. One risk that I am taking here is these decks often play Strip Mine, and if he's playing Strip Mine, that'll allow him to force through Edric. But that's only 1 card out of 87, and waiting a turn just makes it more likely for other types of things to go wrong. Alright, so here he plays another island, and this makes me wonder if he does not have another counterspell. Because if he was smart, he might have been able to drop Edric and draw a bunch of cards there. He knows I have a counterspell, but if he had one there, I would have assumed he would have forced the Edric through. However, I believe next turn I discovered that he just missed his opportunity. So I lose the flip, draw an island, try and cast Bribery, and I'm surprised when he tosses out a counterspell. Why he didn't cast Edric and proactively counter it is beyond me. Although, one important thing when you see opponents make plays that you don't quite understand is sometimes you obviously have access to different information than they have. Let's look at it from his perspective on the other side of the table. So let's say he did that play. He drops Edric, eats the counterspell with that Arcane Denial, and draws 3 cards. He's tapped out, and he's facing an opponent with 7 mana on the table, and possibly an 8th mana in hand. That's scary to be tapped out against, because if he's not playing, I don't know, Daze, Force of Will, Pact of Negation, this deck can do all sorts of nasty things. Let's say I dropped an Ugin against him and just wiped his entire board with plenty of counters to spare. Or let's say I go Mana Vault into Time Stretch, or this Bribery fetches something he has that's very nasty. Probably not in his deck, but the point is sometimes you see opponents make plays that kind of make you scratch your head, like why didn't they do that instead? And the answer is they're human too. They don't have access to all the information. They play scared sometimes. Facing a blue deck with a bajillion mana is a scary proposition. And then also sometimes they just go on tilt, or they just miss things. So here he casts Arcane Denial on that. Also important to note that casting Arcane Denial into tapping out, into your opponent untapping with a bunch of mana is scary when they get to draw 2 extra cards to boot. Alright, so here I don't push it, I don't try and defend it for the same reasons as last time, that I can't afford for him to slam Edric down. So here I grab Soul Ring and Flooded Strand. And I'm very happy to see more mana. I am starting to run out of threats, but this will allow me to cast 2 5-drops in 1 turn. So here we have Treetop Scout off the Green Sun Zenith, just one more 1-drop evasive creature. And I am starting to take a lot of damage here. I'm down to 21 with a Mana Crypt in play. Alright, so I go to play out Soul Ring. And then I go into Time Warp. So I have a couple options here. If this resolves, I can take a chance on Jace. And and see if that gets through. But if he has something like Mana Leak, that's just not a good plan. Or if he's just, respecting that counter spell. And he lets it resolve. So if I don't resolve anything else, that's not that great. I mean, it allows me to cycle, to draw another card, maybe dig into some more action, but I'll be in the same place I started. Now, Jace here is fine, getting to draw 2 extra cards over the course of this turn and an extra turn, but it also is very likely to run into a counter spell. So instead, I think, why not take advantage of Time Warp with Thada Adel? Finally cast my commander out there now that I have a breathing window. This allows me to keep up counter magic, and thanks to the Time Warp, will allow me to keep up the counter spell as well on the following turn. So here, I think I have this set so it doesn't record the chat, but my opponent says something a little snarky because he attempts to counter this only to get it remanded. And at this point, what's funny is I'm still in a lot of trouble. Yes, I can take an artifact, but short of that artifact being something like an Umezawa's Jitte, which who knows, I'm still going to be in trouble. But instead, what do I see? I see he concedes in response. And that illustrates one funny thing about 1v1 Commander. Most people are playing some unfair cards. Most people don't think twice when they, cast Soul Ring, Mana Crypt, turn 1 5-drop, or whatever nonsense that their deck likes to do. And that's fine. This format is about doing powerful things. In some cases, it's about doing powerful things quickly. But of course, the popular saying, the saying that I like to use in Commander is, only my version of powerful things is fun. Everyone else's version of powerful things is unfun or unfair. And it's particularly funny. There is no banned list in this format, so people or no real banned list that affects you too much. So people play all sorts of powerful strategies. This guy very likely got this deck list off a pre-banning tournament in a French dual commander. But he likes to, so it's kind of funny to me when players like this decide to be snarky about the powerful things you're doing, and they tend to go on tilt. Like, this guy still easily could have won this game, but instead he decides to just quit in a rage. And that's unfortunate, because I think this could have been an even more interesting game had it kept going. I would have really been looking for something like Cyclonic Rift or Vidalcan Shackles off the top, but we'll never know, because he quit even though he still had a chance to win. I do find it somewhat annoying when people rage quit, but then again, I've been there myself. So I can't fault him too hard for that. And I still think this video is instructional because it really shows another example how you play around counterspells, focusing on what's important in the matchup, and sequencing your plays in a way that maximizes your ability to win the game. This is a game that I probably had no business winning, but you play in a certain way and you can keep your opponent guessing, and sometimes your opponent makes mistakes. So hopefully you enjoyed that video, and we'll see what else we can find today.